Hi, welcome to the Commercial Gas Engineer channel. I'm just going to go through a compilation of leaks that I've come across. This is one where it was in a high-rise building in central London and there was about 7 bar of pressure and there was a leak on some low carbon steel pipe. And this is it close up. It's just a small leak, but it was causing great problems, especially with the amount of pressure that was coming out of it. So I cut that out and used the press fit machine and just replaced it with 2 couplings. On this roof, we had some plastic pipe that was leaking all over the place and managed to replace it eventually after getting all of the pigeon poo off the pipes cleaned by the local authority. Then it was replaced. This connection was a plastic connection that broke off, snapped off. It was connected to some form of dosing pump, and had to just put a cap on it, and that was sorted. So here you can see it. The connection had just snapped off, but I just put a plug. I used a plug to plug it off, and that was sorted. Here is a pinhole leak in a elbow. But because where it is, sometimes it can be hard to just attach a bit of rubber around it on a Jubilee clip. In this scenario, what I did is just to get by until the next day until I could get the parts, I put a bit of epoxy resin on it and a clip. It was on the secondary return. So I had a Jubilee clip, some epoxy resin, a bit of rubber, and it slowed the leak down until the next day until I could get the fittings. And then I just came back with my press gun and my hired press gun, and then I cut in a coupling and an elbow and so on, replaced some of the pipework. It was a bit of a hard one because down below there was quite a drop, so you couldn't drop the press fit gun, otherwise you were finished, or the fittings and so on, because it was several floors down. This here was a leak on a gas pipe in a building, and it was hard to find this leak because when you did a tightness test there was no problem, but the leak in fact was coming from the pilot tube. So when you turn the burner on, that's when you turn the boiler on, that's when you got the bubbles bubbling up from the pilot tube. But hard one because there was a smell of gas and it was hard to find a leak. So you'd do a tightness test and you'd be convinced that there was no leak, but then there was actually a leak when you turned the boiler on. This is an awkward one as it was a leak in a building in an awkward position. Took a long time to trace the pipe work through the building to identify what pipe it was, and then to realize that the pipe was actually sort of a redundant pipe in one sense that didn't need to be there anymore. So that was cut out. It can be hard to identify what pipes are serving what in certain buildings, especially when there's difficult access getting around the building. This There was a leak, and often boilers are decommissioned, take it like isolated, but they're not capped or plugged. And this was one of those scenarios where a boiler was isolated with the isolation valves, but the isolation valves were letting by. Because there was no clearance behind the boiler, we just had to cut out the pipework and use a primo fitting. Although they're expensive, it's ideal for when you haven't got much space for winding out joints and so on. So here's the primo fitting that is being used to when there wasn't much space to wind the joint out. This is a hot water service pipe that was leaking in a building, and because you couldn't just isolate it and turn the service off because the building needed constant hot water demand based upon the nature of the building, so managed to get some rubber on there and a pipe clip and tighten it up, and then reduced it down to a containable drip until we could source the parts and the recip saw and also the appropriate fittings. In this scenario here, I was carrying out some work nearby in this scenario on the hot water service, draining down one of the clarifiers, and then the pump nearby decided to just give way and start leaking. The problem with this situation that I had is that there was no drain that could be found. The roof was higher than where the pump was, and there was no drain in sight. And this was a roof plant room. In this scenario, this was a bit of a silly call out. I was called out to this leak, um, presumably on the soil pipe, but it wasn't actually the soil pipe. One of these overflow pipes was just running down the soil pipe, so it looked as though the soil pipe was leaking, but it wasn't actually. One of these just popped out of the trap. This is also was a bit of a trivial and repetitive call out where there was a leak coming through a building, but it was basically because the roofing was bad. The roof work was done bad, so anytime there was water subsiding on the roof, it would leak into the building. This was a leak in a building where the water needed to be on most of the time, and so a bit of rubber and Jubilee clip was used to contain this leak. It's probably like this even now, and this was several months ago or even a year ago. I wouldn't be surprised if this was still like this now. So this is it before the Jubilee clip and rubber went on it. This is in a building where the hot water is also in constant demand, and you'd be surprised how much you can clean these up. Like if you get a file out and you gently work away. I mean, I'm not encouraging you to do so, but I have seen these rebuffed up to almost good as new. So here's a scenario where it looked as though you needed to cut this out and change it, but you can clean up the pipe and make it just as new if you file it down and you just take your time and you're patient. In this scenario, there was an ongoing leak in a building, and it was very hard to identify why the system was losing pressure, especially when isolating different parts of the building and you're still getting a drop. Well, in this scenario, there was an automatic air vent, and you can see on the right hand side here, this automatic air vent, the top of the AAV just completely blew off, and it was creating a constant leak. So I isolated it, and then obviously the system stopped losing pressure, but it did take a long time, because how often would you think my leak is going to be found on the roof? In this scenario here, you can see down there the water spraying out. It's a leak on a cold mains water pipe coming into the building. So it was in an awkward place, but the copper was thinned down so much and corroded down so much that you couldn't really do much with it. It probably would be ideal if it was just changed altogether, because it had thinned down so much. So that was and it was right up against the wall. It was an awkward one to work on. This one here is a leak on a pipe in a box away, but you can see the pressure there coming out. This one is a pinhole leak. You can just probably barely see it here. The pinhole leak coming out of this 22mm pipe. I believe it's a 22mm pipe. It could be 28mm, but it's spraying out there. You can see the little mist spray. Sometimes, depending on where they are, you can get something on it to hold it back. Sometimes you can't. This was a major repair in a building where the water couldn't be off for too long, and it was a very tricky job because it was an awkward space and large copper pipe work. You can see it there. There wasn't much space to work here, but it was done. This was a situation in another building where the water needed to be on often. Basically, this was right at the top of the building, so it drained down quickly, but only had a few hours. I think it was within an hour or two it was done. Had everything in preparation, and then just got the pipe work done. But when it was turned back on, even though it was done slowly, the pressure, how all of this moved was incredible. How much you saw the pipe work moving, but it was right at the top of the building. Um, but it was good. It was a good turnaround, and the building wasn't disturbed much. I've seen a lot of these in buildings where they don't want to drain down the building or lose their services. So basically, there's a lot of these clamps. There was a lot of these clamps around the building where instead of them repairing the pipe, they would just buy these quite expensive clamps and just clamp it around the pipe to contain the leak. In this situation, you have some low carbon steel that has corroded, and it was a bit of an awkward one because they were in some tight cupboards. In this scenario here, you can see there's a severe leak on the main cold water service in the building. There we have it again. Now you can see that there is a bit of rubber put on there and a clip, but it contained it to an extent, but it's very difficult because the cut in this pipework, I do not know how it got there. I don't know if somebody went and was doing some work and decided to cut it, but how it just or if it was there all along and then it, or if the hole was small and then it got bigger. But you can see even the rubber on here, it was quite tricky to the position of it to contain it. This is also another leak in an awkward position on some 35mm copper pipe, but I managed to get the rubber around it to slow it down. This scenario, there were leaks in places, but you could see this was probably a riddle reportable situation because the person that did the work decided to glue all the pipe work, actually used glue rather than solder it or anything like that. And I had to get rid of all this pipework that you see here and replace it. But I'd never seen anything so terrible like this before. And I've never riddle reported anybody, but I think in this scenario I should have riddle reported them because even the gas pipe was glued. They used some form of glue and so on. And yes, it was leaking in different places, but I don't understand this kind of work. This is a small leak on a pump which I was about to change and on a pressurization unit. This here, there were some leaks in this system, but the reason why there was problems is also because you can see the amount of sludge that was found inside a gate valve. That was the kind of thing I was finding throughout the whole system. All right, thank you for joining me. Please leave comments below on some of the leaks that you come across. Until next time, bye bye bye.